Moving on to our next session, that is called For Better or Worse Echoes or Emotions. Here we have as a panelist Sudeep Sen, and he will be in conversation with Jhilam Chattarraj. So I would like to welcome the panelists to the stage. Please give a big round of applause. Sudeep Sen is a leading international poet, ladies and gentlemen, whose prize-winning books include Postmarked India, New and Selected Poems by HarperCollins, Area, A.K. Ramanujan Translation Award, Fracticals, New and Selected Poems, and Erotex by Penguin, Kafi Azmi Poems, and Nazms by Bloomsbury, Anthropocene, received Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize, and he has also edited landmark anthologies. Some of them are the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, Modern English Poetry by Younger Indians by Sahitya Akademi, and Converse, Contemporary English Poetry by Indians, Pippa Ran, Blue Nude, Ekphrases and New Poems. Rock and the Whispering Anklets are the forthcoming anthologies which he's going to be editing. And he has also been into photography, and he represented, his photography was represented by Art Embassy, Rome, Berlin, and it is part of Private or Public Collections. As far as his accolades are concerned, the Government of India awarded him the Senior Fellowship for Outstanding Persons in the Field of Culture or Literature, and he is the first Asian honored to deliver the Derek Walcott Lecture and read at the Nobel Laureate Festival. We are so privileged to have you amongst us today, sir. I welcome you. And about our moderator, Jhilam Chattarraj, she's an academic, critic, and poet. She has penned books, out of which one is on Sudeep Sen only, and it is called Sudeep Sen Reading, Writing, Teaching. And one title I found very interesting, it is When Lovers Leave and Poetry Stays. She's been published in Michigan Quarterly Review, New Contrast Magazine, One Art, Colorado Review, World Literature Today, and many other prestigious magazines. And she received the CTI Excellence Award in Literature and Soft Skills Development in 2019 by the department, from the Department of Language and Culture, Government of Telangana, India. And she was also nominated for the Nina Riggs Poetry Award 2023, and currently she is working as an assistant professor at RBVRR Women's College, Hyderabad. Over to you, Jhilam Chattarraj.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Great. Plutarch, the Greek historian and philosopher, once said that the mind is not a vessel that needs filling. It is wood that needs igniting. On that note, I request Sudeep Da, as I call him, to read us a few poems and ignite our minds, because we will be talking about his work, his poetry, and it would make more sense if we first listen to him, right? So Sudeep Da.
I think in the news circuit, it's called the graveyard shift, which is where most people sleep or talk. I'll read a couple of poems from my new book, which is called Anthropocene, which is on climate change, pandemic, and the aftermath of that. It wasn't a book that I was planning to write, but it was a book that happened because we were immersed in a situation that you cannot escape from. You're surrounded by disease, death. I lost 12 people in my life during the pandemic. And this particular poem, which is called Disembodied, which is set in my home city of Delhi, was written after the second wave. And if you remember correctly, Delhi was burning. We ran out of spaces for cremation. I've only heard stories from my grandparents and so on about partition and things like that. but I've actually never seen bodies being burnt on sidewalks. My friend's mother died. We ran out of space, so parking lots were being converted into burning hearths. So this is disembodied, set at that time. My body carved from abandoned bricks of a ruined temple, from minaret shards of an old mosque, from slate remnants of a medieval church apse, from soil tilled by my ancestors. My bones don't fit together correctly as they should. The searing ultraviolet light from aurora borealis patches and etch corrects my orientation. Magnetic pulses prove potent. My flesh, sculpted from the fruits of the tropics, blood from coconut water, skin colored by brown bark of Indian teak, my lungs fueled by Delhi's insidious toxic air, echo asthmatic sounds, a new vinyl dub remix. Our universe, where radiation germinates from human follies, where contamination persists from mistrust, where pleasures of sex are merely a sport, where everything is ambition, everything is desire, everything is nothing, nothing, and everything. White light everywhere, but no one can recognize its hue. No one knows that there is color in it, all possible colors. Body worshipped not for its blessing, but its contour. Artificial shape shaped by Nautilus. Skin moistened by L'Oreal and not by season's first rains. Skeleton strength not shaped by earthquakes or slow molded by fearless forest fires. Ice caps are rapidly melting, too fast to arrest glacial slide. In the near future, there will be no water left, or too much water that is undrinkable, excess water that will drown us all. Disembodied floats, afloat like Noah's Ark. No GPS, no Polestar navigation, no fossil fuel to burn away, just maps with empty grids and names of places that might exist. Already, there is too much traffic on the road. Unpeopled hollow metal shells without brakes swerve about, directionless, looking for an elusive compass. Thank you. And I'll read the last poem from this book. It's called Om, a Cerement. Again, being an artist, a conscientious citizen, as our last speaker spoke, we have very, very little power. We only have our art, the master of photography, the god, Raghu Rai is here, who you'll be listening to and seeing next. As poets, you can do whatever you can do. These are diplomatic weapons. We went on protest marches, we did candle marches, we signed petitions, but the middle of my city was being dug up during the third wave. Why? Because some Disneyland structure was going to be built. Did we need to cut another 1,000 trees? No. Did we need glass facades for our politicians? No. So it's called Om, a cerement, and a lot of it comes from my Buddhist and Hindu scripture love and what else can I say? They give me strength. This poem has 2 or 3 lines from this wonderful Kashmiri poet called Agha Shahid Ali. And if you haven't read Agha Shahid Ali, I must endorse his work and suggest that you must read him. And those lines appear in italics, but I won't flag them. I'm just saying it's from Agha Shahid's poetry. And the poem is about Delhi my city, and it's called Om, a ceremony. In my city, I'm surrounded by constant cries of the dying, burning pyre heaving under burden of smoke, and bones. Wailing summed up by sonic notes of Om. Civilization's first sound, Sanskrit syllable echoing a conch shell's harmonic mapping. Its involute spiral geometry holding within and emanating airborne sonar screams. My ancestors, grandmothers, mother, blew into the smooth shell cupped in their palms, held intimately as if it were a talisman, a prayer, a pranayam in yoga's daily ritual. But breathing is such a privilege these days. Pandemic struck, oxygen deprived, my friends perish, the country buckles airless. Even an exquisite ceremony lacks the sheen or wax to rub the contours of a corpse now. Each day as I write endless condolence notes, etching dirge-like couplets on gravestones, my city continues to be dug up, not to make space for burial sites, but for palaces of illusion. An architecture of frozen music, greed, calumny. A country without a government, a country without a post office, Shahid laments. Let me cry out in that void, say it as I can, I write on that void. Om's celebration now, an unceasing requiem. Yet we chant in hope for peace. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just read one more poem and we can have a chat. So this was book one, which was, of course, based and born in Delhi, and but the biggest disease we are facing is twofold. One is climate change, of course, which nobody wants to take seriously, and the other is the disease of loneliness. Loneliness is the biggest killer, the biggest source of mental health and so on. And I was in South Africa, and I was in this landscape with only animals and birds, 3 months in this place called the Cradle of Humankind. And Cradle of Humankind is a UNESCO protected space where the first fossils of man were found. So when I did my morning and evening walks, I'm actually walking on 2.5 million years worth of fossil and cracking a bone, and you're feeling terrible about it. So the landscape sort of provoked it, and the book Red came out of there. The central poem of Red is a long poem, takes place over many pages, but I'll just read 4 short sections to give you a taste of it. Red. Red is Polash. Red is Alta. It's nuptial, it is birth. Red is Kali, red is Durga. It is Sappho, it is Andal. Red is my vocation, my Chondi part, your Onam. On your forehead I apply triad streaks of white ash, red vermilion, mingled in coconut oil, glistening. Love, passion, death, decay, you say. Red is forever and every day. Blood is not red, it is vital. It is sanguine, it is sad. Red colors my blankness, my void, my needs. It is Hyod's reflected hue of hymen, fertility, flame. It is frigidity, it is coldness, it is passion, it is deep heat. Red is cerise, carmine, it is raw, it is incarnadine. Each shade a subtext, each layer a mood, each line an absence, each texture a canvas. And I'll skip right to the end of the poem because it's a very long poem. And this is parts 9 and 10. Red is an elongated shade of healing, our love song, our alternating heartbeats, a bluebird's lone seagull, defiant, statuesque, beak red. Dawn morphs, dusk ruddy, rufous red, rubescent red. I read red, a spectrum's end. The air now has turned wet and cool, the weather pre-autumnal. My tequila sunset red ink will soon replace the fading violet. Before I leave for home's warm climes, let me embrace once again this red, my loyal, indelible ruby liquid, mapped words without fail. No full stops, only ellipses. My skin's red rashes unknowingly tried to impede its strokes, but didn't diminish its ardor. Everything outside is orange, pink, red. My blood alive in red heat. Red is visceral, red is amniotic, red is rebirth, red is de rigueur. With the power of poetry, I can transform all. With the power of my poetry, red will cauterize, torrefy, engulf, exfoliate, recreate, alive, anew. Thank you.
Everybody is very serious. Please put a smile on your face. His poems might be about doom and gloom, but I'm sure he's also a very humorous, a man with great humor, I believe. So please don't be so serious. Poetry comes out of joyful spaces too. And recently, as we know, Anthropocene won the Wise Owl Award. So congratulations on that. We have Rachna ma'am here.
That's Rachna Singh there, who runs the organization, and this is the first year they instituted the prize, the best book of fiction, poetry, and non-fiction of the year. And I was rather surprised and pleased and smiled at the note that Anthropocene, which I read from, won the prize. So thank you. In front of lots of people from Chandigarh.
Well, Shudibda, in Anthropocene, you talk about climate crisis, as you said. Well, this is not something new. Everybody's talking about it. We hear about it in news, social media, academia, fiction. What is it about poetry that makes the subject different? Not to mention, Paul Crutzen and Eric Stoemer, two academics, they introduced the term Anthropocene, which refers to a geological period affected by man's action, leading to several climate disasters. Why poetry, and what is it that poetry is saying that prose cannot?
So on a frivolous note, I would say I don't have a choice because I don't have any other skills. The only thing I know is how to write, read voraciously, and take photographs. So in terms of benefiting a corporate organization, I don't think they'll get much out of it. So therefore, poetry is very, very meaningful for me. Now, on a more serious note, you must understand that A, poetry is taught very, very badly. I grew up in a very cantankerous Bengali family where we shouted, we overate, we overhugged, we sang, we just danced. It was not very different from a Punjabi family, except we read a lot more. And music. Yes, like my partner, who's a Sikhni from Chandigarh, says, when your book comes out, please do not present it to the family. They'll feel so pressured that वो किताब रखनी पड़ेगी यहाँ. आपको फिर वो कभी खोलने वाले नहीं है. For 40 years, none of my family has read anything. But they are very happy for you, so they'll take you out. So there's that honesty as well. But why poetry? Think of it. Any time we are faced with an important personal or an internal psychic vibe, what do we resort to? Poetry. When we are in love, we write poetry, albeit not very good, but we write poetry. Heartbreak, resort to poetry. Childbirth, we resort to poetry. Marriage, we resort to poetry. Any ceremony you think of, it's poetry. All classical music and dance is based on poetic texts that are sung out. Rag is essentially metrical verse, poetry. Usually, a novel you would read, enjoy it or not enjoy it, and it goes back to the bookshelves. But a book of poems is like a little brother or a sister. It stays next to the bedside. You dip in and out depending on what your mood is. Poetry is also the kind of book that you don't have to read from beginning to the end. You can just open the book, read a poem, get something out of it. It's very user-friendly also. But it's something that is very, very intimate. And we don't think about it like that. Unfortunately, it's taught so poorly. So why poetry? Poetry is essentially something that actually makes a much, much deeper resonance in people's psyche than any other form. So when Anthropocene came out, it was the first book of creative writing on the pandemic. Many reports by bureaucrats and technocrats and scientists have come out, but no creative writing came out of the pandemic. So it was just, and I have to say, when you pick up the book, you realize that 60% of the book is about white light. It's about hope. It's about consolation. It's about healing. So the grim stuff is there for us to see, but if you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, we can't wake up every day. So why poetry? It's God's gift to womankind and mankind. So I'm grateful that that bug bit me, and it's an illness I don't want to be cured of.
But do you think you're still functioning from the margins? I mean, considering, the larger sphere of Indian writing in English, where fiction is, representative of Indian writing in English in the international state. I mean, is poetry still in the margins, and from the margins you're emanating hope? And I understand being in the margins, there's also a benefit because you can question the center only from the margins. So would you agree with that, or what do you think?
Again, it's a choiceless situation. Now, if I make poetry as an agenda, we started about 20 minutes late, if you don't know. Okay. So if you don't have a choice, you stick to what you do best. Poetry is, again, one of those things that, you don't think of the center, margin, top, bottom. It's a genre that is hierarchy-less. It doesn't have left or right margins either. In fact, when you read a book of poems, the white spaces on the page are equally potent and important as the inked part of the page, which is the written or the printed text. So there's a lot of room for meditation, there's a lot of room for interpretation, there's a lot of breathing space which is missing in any other form of written word. Non-fiction, fiction, every page is very dense. So you have to plow through it in a different kind of way. So in a sense, it came very naturally to me. And most things in the periphery actually make the most difference. The mainstream is very facile at one level. There are trends that happen, that come and go, but the margins always remain. Margins is like what? Like parentheses, like family, like the people who hold us. They always remain. But whether or not whether we are doing something specifically on an everyday basis on a mainstream way, just passes as it goes on.
Yeah, and since we're short on time, I'll jump into just the last two questions, as it happens most of the time. Well, your book Red, I see it as a project in cultural geography, where the artist's vision of the landscape is more important than any other, description of what anybody else sees, scientists, geologists, archaeologists. It is how the artists see it. So how you see the Highveld landscape in South Africa is very important in this book. But intermittently, I found even as you were reading, you were constantly referring to India as well, the reference to the Polash flower as such. So what were the commonalities that you found between India and South Africa as you were writing the book Red in terms of landscape, and you thought this was something that should be highlighted? Any one, if you can just share with us.
Well, two things actually. But when we think of landscape, we only think of, ordinarily speaking, external landscape, what you view outward. And that's to do with all art. You look out, but actually what the art is doing is it's looking within. There's an internal landscape which is projected outward when it comes to art. Even in photography, it's an internal landscape that's being captured. If you think of the physics of lens, what is it doing? It's capturing light on a bromide with an inversion because the light rays travel the other way around. So you have a flipped image, and of course new lenses have told us we can flip it. So how can you not write about landscape? Especially internal landscape. So of course, when I was in South Africa, I was writing about the space because this was such a glorious piece of land. I'm walking on fossils which are, so many millions of years old. And then my touchstone is always India, Bengal, Punjab, because these are my home territories, so to speak. And I said, I've written a book on South Africa, but actually I really want to write a book about my own country. So then book 3, which is the Eco Trilogy's book 3, rock started. So I traveled from Hyderabad, tracing the rock landscape. I mean, the incredible rock landscape in Hyderabad, which is, of course, now being cut down and high-rises are coming up, all the way down through the Deccan to Hampi. That Deccan Craton, the subterranean rock layer, is 2.5 million years old, one of the oldest, and we possess it. So when I'm with landscapes like rock, it is a very unjudgmental kind of thing. Human beings are a pain in the butt because first thing, before reading, they'll judge. First thing they'll do is look at time and say, we need to get off stage. They look beautiful. So the landscape, of course, becomes very important. And I would say that really look at your internal landscape first. Everything else becomes very easy.
Yes, I agree with that point, but there was a specific reason why I raised the idea of landscape. This is specifically because I think Red is one of the first books which comes in the context of Indian poetry in English that does such a physical and a visual study of landscape. So any research scholar, any student, anybody who's interested in working on cultural geography, Red would be a wonderful book, actually. So you do talk about interior, but the exterior is very, very visceral in this book. just go to the last question.
I'm so
Is it?
sorry.
We need to have
interrupt.
one more
It
question.
breaks
Let
my
me
heart
ask.
to
Let me
interrupt.
ask Jeelam. I have to take the chair's privilege here.
Yes,
Let me
but
ask
unless-
Jeelam, because she's written this big book. It's a book in process. This is just a proof copy. This is about 5 or 6 years of her research in poetry. And when she approached me that she was going to write this book, one of the interesting things that happened was she says poetry is taught very poorly. So I want to write a book which introduces poetry as part of pedagogy. Just talk a little bit about that, because I think that's a very important space.
Well, this book is a collection of essays, reviews, interviews that I have conducted and written over the years since, I think, 2020. And on Shrudeep Shen's work. It is not about Shrudeep Shen, it is about his poetry. And also consciously we've created a space in this book where students have interpreted his poetry, and there are sections with explanations and meanings, which I felt facile at one point of time, but I said, you know, this is the reality. Because wherever I go in colleges and schools, they say, oh, कोई material नहीं है पढ़ने का, study material नहीं है. I don't have the time as an academic to invest, you know, in poetry and read it and interpret it. So I thought that, okay, if there's no material, let me create it. Let me give it a shot. Let me try it, and let poetry come back to the classrooms, where English literature classrooms, in a scenario where most English literature departments have been shut down. My department in my college has been shut down. So there's little hope, but I expect that this book will make some changes and some waves, because in the age of AI, let human language and human emotions prevail. Thank you. On that note, we will, you know,
Thank
what
you
we do.
We've been
so much.
pushed away from the
Yeah,
stage, but that's all right.
I
We
am
will vacate
so
the
sorry.
stage.
I hate
You're not
myself
sorry
doing
at all.
this. I am sorry.
You have to
because the
invite us
next speaker
next year.
has to catch a flight. I'm telling you, it's the cruel moving wheels of time to which I am a victim, a helpless victim. Otherwise, I would have loved to see this session go on and on and on, because I'm myself a poetry lover. And would have
No,
loved
we
to-
would not go on
But,
and on. For
thank you.
free, we wouldn't.
Thank
for
you
sure.
very, very much, all of you. I loved the energy that was coming
Yes.
from your eyes, and that allowed me to just stay on for whatever time we were allowed to be here. Poetry is center stage. Do not forget that.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And the planet definitely doesn't need more successful people. It
And,
desperately needs more peacemakers.
we are coming next year for sure,
Healers,
right?
for
Thank you.
sure. Restorers, poets, storytellers, and lovers of all kinds. On that note,